Okay, good evening, everyone. Trina runs a tight ship, and I've been told that our time has been slightly shortened, so we're going to keep this sweet and concise. My name is Elina Noor. I'm with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I was actually particularly animated by a few of the comments and calls to action brought up earlier today. I was particularly invigorated by Karen Howe's provocation to, she's not in the room right now, but if I'm not misrepresenting her, to basically flip the tables and glitch the matrix and capture or recapture and build agency. And so this is what we're going to try to explore a little in this panel. With three technical experts, which is not often that we get the technical guys in the room to talk about how the technology actually works. We also have some homework that we set them, and so they each have just one slide with basically their main points. And so if we are ready with the tech over there, I will introduce them first, and then we'll look at their slides. So we have Nasubo Ongoma, as Trina mentioned, introduced them very briefly, Director of Tech Economy at Qhala, Kenya, William Tjhi, Head of Applied Research at AI Singapore, and Sebastián Cifuentes, Technical Lead at the National Center for AI or Cenia in Chile. Nasubo, can I hand the mic and screen over to you?
Good evening. Is it evening? Yes, good evening to you all. I'm a bit lost because I think we are 5 hours behind in Kenya. So my name is Nasubo Ongoma. As I've been rightfully introduced, my role is to understand how technology shapes people's lives and how also that shapes the economy. And so in my role, I work with people, both young and old, to understand how can we build platforms that suit them. And so as we do this work, we realize that, first let me give a context. Kenya is in Africa, and Africa has 54 countries. The median age for many African countries is 19. And we have over 1.4 billion people. And these 1.4 billion people speak over 2,000 languages. And so when it comes to building for Africa, or even in Kenya we have 42 languages, it means that you have to think about which language do you use? Because we know that English is the language of choice, and because it has been highly digitized. And I appreciated the statistic on only 1% of what is available is on LLMs. And so when it comes to us building, we are thinking, how best can we build at a cheaper price, right? Because what we've learned as we were building our AI models is that it is vastly expensive. It costs sometimes up to 3 times more than building in English. And so that is where I'm coming from. So as I talk about this, we are looking at the policies that exist. As I mentioned, we have 54 countries. Each country has their own laws, their own policies, their own languages. So as we build scaling, and we are thinking about scaling, that is also important to note. And so largely, we are invisible to the global north. And in as much as we want to bring visibility through our work, we realize that even in terms of access to digital platforms, we are still invisible. We are the continent with the least access and connectivity. And so when we are doing work at Qhala, we are trying to build models, knowing that at the background, we don't have enough devices. With the languages also not well represented. There's also the issue on AI literacy. So can we also build as we also educate people? Because the end goal is to ensure that people have agency over the models. now that they are using AI tools and AI platforms, then how best can they use it to make sure that they are the ones in control and not really getting direction from AI? Lastly, policy. In terms of policy and regulation, can we bring the right people in the conversation to ensure that we have the right policies that enable us to build? Because you can't innovate when already it's policies, the policies are against you. So for us, we are looking at innovation as the environment. We're not looking at a product, we're looking at the environment that allows us to build, allows us to have platforms that speak in our language, because unless we do that, then we're not solving a need. And the whole conversation today was about value. What is the value that our young people are looking for? Because I said median age, we have the young people, so we have, in terms of the talent, we do have them. In terms of education, yes, there are young people doing a lot of good work. So I think I will leave at that, because the call is, can we continue funding what's already existing? Because we are not only building, I said innovation is not about the product. Innovation now becomes the environment that allows the product to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasubo. So from Africa, we'll go to Southeast Asia. William, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at AI Singapore?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. So I'm William. I'm from Singapore. I'm representing AI Singapore. This is the national program office of the government. We focus on AI, fully funded by the government. We do research, we do capability building, but I think I'm here to share with you the story of the project that I'm currently leading. So we build open large language models for better understanding of Southeast Asian languages, Southeast Asian contexts. We call the model the Sea Lion. We have 4 versions already. You can download them. I think we'd like to address the questions that is being asked, which is what does it take to build this kind of a homegrown tag that is a little bit localized, right? So we have been doing this for 2 years, and if I can have a look back, of course there are many things needed to make it successful. But if I can distill 3 main important things, it boils down to these 3, right? The national AI strategy, the maturity of the ecosystem, and very, very importantly, openness spirit and collaboration, right? The Sea Lion was developed not in a vacuum. AI Singapore has been around for a while when it was actually started. Singapore has released 2 national AI strategy when we started the Sea Lion project. I think in the world of AI, where everything changes very rapidly, very, very easily you get distracted, right? There's so many things you can try. I think the strategy gives us the direction and the boundary. Singapore is not China. Singapore is not America. We have to play a little bit different game. And that gives us guidance. We have to position ourselves differently. We're not competing, we are complementing. We try to be the force of trustworthiness and so on, right? So that the strategy gives us focus. Ecosystem maturity helps us to, I think what happened is that when we started, right, this is building on top of the many works that have been done in AI Singapore for, I think about 3 years before we started the Sea Lion, right? So for example, we have this program to build capability, talents in AI Singapore. I think half of my team right now came from that, graduated from that, right? And then when we were building all this, promoting the adoption, we built the infrastructure in Singapore. And I think that helps the investors or the funding agencies sort of like, they're capable of imagining, after ChatGPT, where the value can come from, right? So it's not that difficult to convince them anymore. So I think without the ecosystem maturity, can it be done? It can be done, but you have to think of a way to leapfrog, which is very, very hard. And lastly, openness, right? I think we are a small country, right? So it's very difficult to build something very, very expensive. And how did we manage to do that? We benefit from the open source community. We don't have to build everything ourselves. And I think it's only right for us to kind of contribute back. And this openness allows us to build collaboration with the region which is needed for us to understand what's the need, and also to kind of have collaboration with the big guys, right? Like we have collaboration with Google, we have collaboration with Alibaba to get the most advanced technology as long as it's open, right? And you know, I like the fact that if we are open, we don't have to carry the burden ourselves. You know, some people can come to us and say, hey, actually some of the gaps that you have, you know, I addressed it myself. I fork your repository, and then I do a PR review, you know, for you to merge into the main branch, right? So I like that fact. Yeah. So maybe I'll stop there.
That's a great introduction. Sebastián, over to you.
Hi, how are you? My name is Sebastián, Sebastián realmente. I come from the National Center of Artificial Intelligence in Chile. I will say Cenia, so on, because it's a really long name. We are a non-profit organization, and we are building a large language model called LATAM GPT. Why we are building a large language model is because large language models, or LLMs, speak and can store some elements from the cultures, from the data they were training on. So we kind of, in Latin America, we have a subculture, we have a lot of cultures. We have a specific kind of Spanish that is not the Spanish that's speaking in Spain. Last panelist was from Argentina, and he knows that in Latin America we speak a really specific kind of Spanish. I came from Chile, and it's said that the Chilean Spanish is one of the worst Spanish that is spoken in the region. The thing is that we found that large language models like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and so on doesn't really know elements from our culture. So we are trying to build a collaborative network between countries, between organizations along Latin America, to build this kind of technology to learn representations about all culture, about all languages. And things that we need to build this kind of technology are first local talent. In Chile and in Latin America, we have found that we have people really skilled, people that know a lot about this kind of technology and can build this kind of technology. But to build a language model or to build any kind of artificial intelligence, also we need the proper infrastructure. So we are trying also to make investment in infrastructure to keep building our own kind of technology. Why? Because Latin America, as other countries in the world, only consumes technology from United States, China, maybe Europe, and so on. So we want to change the game, and we want to be also creators and not only consumers of the technology. And also in Chile we have this, and in Latin America also, have this lack of having an enabled ecosystem to do this kind of projects, because we see these kind of projects to be strategical to improve our technology, improve our knowledge, and also to make the foundation to build new things. We were talking with William that when we start this kind of projects, other organizations thinks that it's possible to build this kind of technology in a zone like Latin America, when no one does this kind of projects, so everyone thinks it's impossible. So we are trying to be the first ones to build this kind of technology and say to the region, hey, this is possible, we can do a lot, and also we can build this network of collaboration to build this kind of models. Why it's important to talk about this kind of projects and also answering the question is because this kind of investment is strategic. When we speak about artificial intelligence, do not only think about large LLMs. Think about any kind of artificial intelligence. And that kind of artificial intelligence can make solutions that has real impact on society. For instance, in Chile, we have a project that wanted to reduce the waiting list on healthcare. People tend to wait for months, even years, to be attended in the public system. And with artificial intelligence solution they aren't state of the art. We can reduce this kind of list by months. People that was waiting for years can receive healthcare. So this kind of technology can impact the society really, really in a positive way. And finally, and I think it's something that is common to the three panelists here, is about technology sovereignty. We want to have our own technology. We want to have skills that are necessary in this world that is changing. That I think is address the questions.
Great, thank you. I actually want to pick up on this point about infrastructure and sovereignty that all three of you brought up. We talk about reducing dependency, mitigating dependencies on infrastructure that comes from the outside. Can you each talk a little bit about how that's being done in your experience? Because essentially we're talking about compute, about chips, and we stretch it out further. It's physical infrastructure that connects to these little things that essentially we in the global majority are still dependent on from the outside. So when we talk about enhancing sovereignty and reducing dependency on infrastructure, what does that mean in real terms? Nasubo?
Okay, I'd look at it in this way. So I know that when we talk about digital sovereignty, we are talking about how do we even store the data. That could be a big one. So collectively, Kenya or other, for example, at Qhala, we are now collecting like our own language. We've started with one of the local languages, Kalenjin. And why we are collecting this data and how we are doing this is through volunteers. As I said, we have a lot of the youthful population. So we are working with university students to allow us to collect that data. That data is going to be something that we own as an organization and together with our partners. So that is one of the steps that we are looking at. And we have also other organizations, for example, Masakane, who is also collecting data. So when it comes to sovereignty, is how do we collect that data and have ownership over it? Because we know that for the African continent, a lot of our data is very oral. So can we start first with collecting the right data and ensuring that we are representing our context well? So yeah.
I think it's a story of, you know, what do you call it? Building on the shoulder of giants, you know. So we are very much into open source and open development. So we don't have to build everything from scratch. So, you know, in the first version of the C line, we build everything from scratch. It's very expensive, yeah. And then in the subsequent versions, we learn how to build on top of the, you know, the open models that are a little bit more permissive, you know, the Gemma, the Llama, and more recently, Qwen. That saves us a little bit of, you know, investment in the infrastructure. But it's also a story of consolidation. Basically, we don't do this alone, right? Essentially, we invite all the, you know, the regions to come together with us, you know, let's just do this together, right? There's a consolidation of the GPU resources. The data just needs to be processed once, rather than, you know, every country doing it themselves, right? So I think we are very lucky that the regions are responding to us in a very positive way. And then there's actually a last thing, one last thing that we are doing that tend to be overlooked, right? Again, we don't have to do everything ourselves. We don't have to do everything ourselves. We have been building these ways to measure the performance of large language models when it's applied on our regional languages, right? On our culture. We call it the C Helm. Actually, we borrowed the idea from Stanford Helm, right? So we built the Southeast Asia version. So people can actually measure how well the LLMs perform, you know, in Indonesian, in Filipino, and in Thai, right? And in that way, you know, there's some kind of a compass, and you know, it's good. We tap on the competitive nature of the field, that people want to do it. Yeah, of course, we are doing our part to plug the gap, but also we don't have to do it alone. But we have to empower the world to navigate on the direction where they can make the improvement.
I want to address dependency. To build artificial intelligence, basically we need three things. We need the algorithms, we need data, and we need compute. So what happened when you got the algorithms because they are open sourced? You got the data because you have people that say, hey, here is a lot of data, gigabytes, terabytes of data, but you don't have GPUs, you don't have compute. So you have to buy it. And then let's say I'm working with a team, we want to iterate because machine learning is about iterations. You train a model, you test the model, it tests well, okay, let's go. It doesn't go well, so let's train again. So when you don't have compute, you depend on paying those computing hours. You can pay for an instance on a cloud server $1 the hour, $30 the hour, depending on what kind of technology you are building. If we're talking about large language models, you're talking about paying thousands of dollars in a week of training. So when we invest in infrastructure, you are investing in teams that can use your servers and make faster experiments without burning basically money, and they can experiment faster, share their compute power. Also here in Chile, we have shared clusters. So if each table here is a research team, we can share this compute. So you have one project, we have a lot of projects in the room, so we share this, and the server is always occupied, and then we are improving all resources usage. So when we are talking about reducing dependency in the terms of compute, this is the things that we are working on.
So, and I'm not trying to be purposely antagonistic because I've been trying to work through these questions myself, but maybe sovereignty is not quite the right word then, because there's no way to completely eliminate dependency. Are we then talking about autonomy, tech autonomy instead? Agency, autonomy, not so much sovereignty, which seems to be the buzzword being used in a lot of policy documents these days. Just some quick reactions.
Definitely yes. Yeah. So for us, it's more about autonomy and having the capability. In case it's needed. Right now we don't need it. Right now, we can access all those open models available to us, right? But in case suddenly we don't have access anymore, it's the capability that we want to build, and we can be autonomous and play an active part.
So the North Star is sovereignty. You have the data, you have the compute, you have the algorithms, but you have to start from somewhere. So we don't want to lose that North Star. We want to still look at it as this is our ultimate goal. Yes, there are people who are miles ahead, but we can still find a way to leapfrog. For example, Qhala has an arm called Qubit. We are working with different partners. So there's also one partner who is giving us access to their GPUs to allow us to build, because we want to have full ownership, and we also want to take technology to the direction that we feel that our people are going to really get value.
And I think talking about data, you can talk about sovereignty, because specifically in LATAM GPT, we have teams that want to share their data with the internet. Basically, let's publish our data and so on. But people that say, okay, this is my data. I want you to use them, but I do not want to be public, for instance. So when you have your data, you have the rights over your data. You decide what to do and what not to do with your data. And maybe there you can talk about sovereignty. It's not just I can do things with my data, because I can take decisions about them. And then we have panels that talk about policies and the law that I have, or the rights that I have to do with my proper data. But I think those two terms are related.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about data, because I think there is an assumption that all data is equal, and it's not on many levels, right? But for example, if we're talking about the understanding of property and how you're going to translate that into local languages, whether on the African continent, in Latin America, and your various different iterations of Spanish, and also in Southeast Asia, property in many respects is actually a new concept for many communities in the global majority, because indigenous communities never really had this bounded concept of property. And so when we're talking about the translation, tokenization of words like property, how do you ensure that context is faithfully retained in the local understanding according to traditional wisdom, for example, of communities that are indigenous or that have been marginalized from kind of modern day notions? Nasubo?
So you've rightly put it. We need to do the dirty work, which is collect the data, which is ensure that the data is representative, which is looking for ways to make tokenization understand our context. Because right now, the way LLMs divide the data is affecting us. I said more than 3 times for low resource languages. So we just have to do the dirty work because AI models, or even when we're looking at small language models or large language models, they have to have the context right. Right now, it's not there. And that's why I mentioned we are largely invisible, because even when you go to big tech, they don't see our impact because we are not represented. So we just have to do the hard work and the dirty work. And sometimes that's why I said it requires a lot of resources. These resources could be financial, it could also be the people. And I think for us, we have the people, but we are trying to see how best can we utilize what we have to ensure that we still get ahead.
I think to address the question, the important thing is to work with the communities. In Cenia, we're working also in a project that has a not so flashy name, is the translator, Rapa Nui Mapudungun. Rapa Nui and Mapudungun are languages, indigenous languages on the country, on Chile. And the work that has to be done, that people working on this project has done with the communities is enormous. Why? Because there are some words that different groups from the same indigenous people basically have different meanings or different specifically meanings given some contexts. So how they are working on that is by basically building benchmarks that really represent what the communities want to represent with their languages. When we are speaking about a benchmark, is a lot of questions that they do to a language model. In the case of the translator, you have sentences, and you have the correct sentence translated into Rapa Nui or Mapudungun in this case. And the political work that they have to do to put it in a table, a lot of people from the same community, but that maybe have historical problems because of history, basically, has been enormous for these groups. So I think the answer, how do we really represent the language for different groups, is by working with the communities. And also for Latin GPT, we're doing the same, because in Latin America, we have shared words that mean something really, really different. I think, for instance, in Argentina, they say colectivo to a bus. I'm right, it's a bus, yeah. And in Chile, it's a cab. So when you ask a Latin American language model, what is colectivo, it should answer both, because we are losing one of those representations.
So there are two levels from my experience. The first one is the more, I would say, low resource languages, but not very low, right? You know, we have national, I think we have thousands of languages, not 2,000, 1,000, you know, in Southeast Asia. But we only have about, I think, 13 or 14 national languages. So I think at the level of the national languages, yes, I agree with what was being shared, right? So basically, we have to work with the community and collect the data ourselves. You know, when we started with the Sea Lion, we have a decision to make whether we want to build it ourselves first and then share it with the community later, or from day one, involve them in the building. We decided to go with the latter because we are trying to resolve the representation. So that is doable, and we have been doing it. So I think by involving them, we get the representation signals very strongly in the data. A little bit more complicated, but it's there. But then when we move out of the national languages, that's when the real challenges, you know, really, very, the barrier is there. Because the people who are speaking these languages, they also don't want to learn these languages anymore. Yeah? They're basically saying, there is no economic incentive for me to learn. And now this AI is basically, you know, very capable in English, very capable in Filipino or Indonesian. Why do I care about all these dialects that my parents are speaking, right? So it's a totally different level. So I'm actually going, I don't have the answer to that. I'm actually having a POC right now with one NGOs operating in Indonesia, trying to find a way to create the right incentive mechanism for this. You know, I'm open for any ideas from the audience if there is, but it's really different level. Yeah.
Thanks, super interesting. We have about 11 minutes for Q&A, and I want to give the opportunity to all of you for any of your comments or questions. But I think this point about data being more than just data, it's about knowledge, right? And it's about preserving not just, quote, low resource languages, but it's also preserving that knowledge perspective and worldview. And I'm not sure that we should necessarily be communicating to the global north if ultimately our purpose is to build for our own communities. Any questions? Yes, one over there, please. 2, 3, okay.
Hi. Thank you for this conversation. I think it's very important to pinpoint the importance of language. I think with homegrown tech, and I think we see it in Malaysia as well, comes homegrown issues. So I think especially in Southeast Asia, but I'm sure it's everywhere, the question of, you know, let's say censorship, certain narratives. In Malaysia, we have 3R, race, religion, royalty, and that's been kind of from the start, because we are trying to look into AI, homegrown AI here. So that's already been kind of put in place. It's a barrier that's put in place. So I was wondering, in your experience, I think, how do you deal with your homegrown issues? And because we're talking about, it's not AI sovereignty, it's autonomy as well. But can you really accord autonomy? You can include as many people as you want, but if in the first place you're censoring what they are allowed to, the information they're giving, but also the information you can process from them. So I was wondering, in your 3 very diverse experiences, how you kind of go about it, what the pushback is, and yeah, what your safeguards are.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sorry, I'm Cynthia. I'm with CIJ Malaysia.
Cynthia. Okay, I'm going to do 2 over here, and I'll come back to Burcu.
Hi, I'm Malik from BFM Radio here in Malaysia. Parallel thing, I don't trust my government with with AI LLM sovereignty, actually. So because of that, for that main issue. Actually, I might trust the Singapore model a little bit more, because you might take a bit of a neutral stance. It's just like in the 90s, we trusted Singapore news on Malaysia more than we trusted Malaysian news on Malaysia, right? I mean, it's that kind of, you kind of like, you know, and like I trust other sources of news more than the Singapore press when talking about Singapore, right? So that kind of thing. So, but one thing I noticed about the two, but I guess you're doing it for one, you're doing it on behalf of LATAM, and you're doing it on behalf of Southeast Asia. But I'm sure you get pushback from individual countries on, hey, we want our own country's LLM, like Malaysia is, right? They're doing with Ilmu, with all the constraints around it. How do you kind of like counter that in the sense that, look, you know, yeah, we understand you want data sovereignty to sovereignty/autonomy, but we're doing something else for you. What is that something else? How do you get over that push for sovereignty, national sovereignty?
Take, one more over there, please.
Hi, my name is Michael Ogia. I'm coming from Serbia. I'm here representing a project called the Journalism Cloud Alliance. So I'm working with Global Forum for Media Development, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And I completely agree with you that you need algorithms, data, and compute, but you need money. You need lots and lots of money because all of those things cost a lot. And I'm just curious if you're thinking about building your own tech, what are your infrastructure providers? Who is providing the tech? Are you building it yourself? Are you using the hyperscalers? This, from our experience, is one of the biggest bottlenecks to building tech and to keeping it going.
Thank you. And then finally, Burcu.
Okay. I think we discussed this very briefly during my panel. Like, there are all these discussions taking place now, like in Europe, in Canada, like Eurostack, Canada Stack. I heard about Singapore Stack too. And so the question is, I mean, the stack conversation is like a little bit different than the homegrown tech because the stack goes for like full independency, like, you know. So the question is, do you think, is it possible to build like ASEAN Stack or Singapore Stack or Malaysia Stack, or in your case, like Chile Stack or Kenya Stack? Because there are many brilliant people in Europe, in Canada, in India, like they've been thinking about this. They are reimagining an independent tech. Like, so is it possible? What's your take on that? Like, you know, are they wasting their time, or like, you know, or it's possible? And if it is possible, we should talk about that because we should be very, very ambitious. You know, I keep saying that the window is closing, you know, and we can't really do much like criticizing the system. You know, we need to build, but what should we build? Is the stack the answer?
I'm all for dismantling the system, but we'll let the panelists answer. Nasubo, please.
Okay, so I'll go with, is it possible to build a Kenya stack? Probably. But for us to actually build, it requires that we have to, you know, we keep on mentioning leapfrog, but, and I've said that we need to have our representation. So that is exactly what is missing. I would give the classic example of M-Pesa, which is mobile money, that was able to leapfrog. Why did it work? The conditions were right. Regulators were in place. The innovation was right, and it used something that Kenyans were already doing in terms of sending money. We used to put money into like matatus, which are public service transportation, from one town to the next. So it is all about finding that unique position for you. I would give an example. We've done a lot of research trying to see why are we not fully represented and what can we do, for example, in the health space, where we realize that the benchmarks that exist are not representative of us. We have a lot of tropical diseases. So can we now develop our own benchmark? Yes, we can. And we have done that. So it's about being, and I remember someone who mentioned, I can't remember who it was, who said that we are now building for smaller problems, smaller use cases. That is the next frontier. And even as big tech has the technology, for us is to see what are the gaps that are relevant for us and how can we fill them. So yes, it is possible. And in terms of the pushback for sovereignty from governments, it's still to invite them into conversation. Yes, there is that, but I think William is the one who's going to tell us a lot more on that. I think I'll leave it at that.
I want to address the Chilean tech. I think that we can build technology. Maybe we cannot compete with OpenAI, with Meta. I don't know if you know, but Meta has the biggest cluster of GPUs in the world. It's among us. But I think that we can build our own solutions to our own problems. The example that I gave you about public health in Chile was language model, but not state of the art, but a language model with our own data, with our own infrastructure, trained by our own scientists. And we know better or how to solve, or not how to solve our problems, but our problems that any person that comes from outside. So I think that we can build our own technology, but we have to play our cards strategically. About the money, someone asks who is providing us. Specifically in Cenia, we have alliances. For instance, NVIDIA and AMD are interested in that we use their GPUs. So they are, do you want to use our GPUs? We can make a deal and so on. Or AWS, Google, they are trying to invest in making alliances in the region. Also, in terms of infrastructure, we have public funding for infrastructure. So we have like physically GPUs that we can use and that are available to the public. So people in universities can use them. And so there comes money too. And about, I like the question that, I don't know where it was made, about the something else. We are building something, you are going to gain and something else. What is the something else? That was the question. The something else that we are trying to build in LATAM with LATAM GPT is that we can build things in Latin America. And we have found that there are a lot of groups in Latin America that want to build things. For instance, I was speaking with William. We found a group, a research group in Ecuador. They come to us, they talk to us and say, we are experts in vision. We know nothing about language modeling. We are really interested in learning. And thanks to you, we are now building our own department of language modeling. So that the something else is the idea of doing things in Latin America.
You know, this talk about sovereign AI, you know, Jensen Huang recently made a tour in Southeast Asia. In my experience, you know, before he came, you know, people were a little bit more open. After he came, suddenly all this sovereign AI discussion came into the picture, right? So I mean, whether there's a correlation or not. The thing about, you know, censorship as well as the pushback from the various countries, right? You know, it stems from you know, this realization, you know, when we built the Sea Lion in the beginning, here we are in Singapore, we are building for Southeast Asia, right? It didn't feel quite right for us to basically say, hey, we build a model, we do alignment, we have aligned it for Malaysia. We have aligned it for Thailand, you know, okay, you use it, right? You know, it doesn't sound quite right to us. What do we know? Right. So I think from that perspective, we have always been taking a position that we are an infrastructure builder. We are not going to push it all the way to the you know, to the final use. We empower people to build on top of what we have. So I think a very concrete example is our collaboration with Gojek. Right. I think some of you who are in Southeast Asia, you're probably familiar. Gojek is one of the biggest technology companies here in Indonesia. Right, so they built the Indonesian variant of the Sea Lion. It's called the Sahabat, and actually they co-developed it with us. Much better in Indonesian than the Sea Lion. Much safer, right? Of course, they have far more data, and you know, we're happy with that. We continue to support them, right? I mean, some countries say, you know, we don't want to work with you, but you know, we tell them, I'm going to make it open for you. You can use it. You know, it can save you a lot of money. Just take it, right? I mean, if you don't want to take it, it's also okay. Right, so I think for us, you know, if each Southeast Asian countries, they're successful in building the local version of the LLMs, very capable, we are happy to partner them. And then we be the common infrastructure. You know, in the benchmark, we will look very, very bad compared to them, but it's okay, right? So we are the common infrastructure, and also when it comes to cross-lingual needs, which are a lot, like tourism, migrant workers, and so on, you know, there's an alternative, which is the Sea Lion itself. Particularly on the censorship, I have a particular situation with Myanmar right now, right? So again, we know what's happening there. So in fact, the people who come to us are the diaspora, right? So not you know, not the authority themselves, right? So basically we support, right? Basically this is the infrastructure. We help everybody. You know, you can make the final version of it on top of it, you know, according to your need. We will empower everybody. Yeah. On the limited resource, right? You know, this has been the story of Singapore, by the way. You know, a small country, we try to, you know, pack a very strong punch, right? As much as possible with whatever we have, we throw the best that we can.
Well, I'm very proud. We're only 2 minutes over time. And actually, Irene had raised her hand, but I'm going to defer to that table over there.
And let's end it there. That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Please join me in thanking our excellent panelists, and thank you for all your questions.